The gratitude tax was due. Commander Eva Rostova watched the gilded host's collection barge descend upon Xylos. It moved with the unhurried grace of a predator that knew its prey could not flee. From the command deck of the UNS Principia, the nascent world below looked like a fragile blue marble webbed in the golden light of the host's orbital architecture. This was humanity's first official contact with a gilded tithe world, and the stakes were the soul of a species. Her orders were to observe and report, but the subtext hummed with the Concordat's deepest law: no sentient race shall be collared. The entire mission hinged on a truth that might have to be forced into the light of a public inquiry. The main screen resolved the image of the barge, a vessel of obscene opulence and crushing scale. It was less a ship and more a cathedral designed to remind the Xylans of their perpetual debt. Magnify collector interface, Rostova ordered, her voice calm and level. The air on the bridge was cool, smelling faintly of ozone and sterilized metal. Her first officer, Aris Thorne, stood beside her, his jaw tight. He saw an injustice that demanded a military response. Rostova saw a contract twisted and malevolent that had to be legally unwound. To break a chain, you must first show the galaxy it exists. They call it the ceremony of Uplift's return, Dr. Lena Petrova said from her console, her tone laced with academic disgust. The host provides stellar shielding, atmospheric processing, and cultural guidance. In exchange, the Xylans offer a tithe, a gesture of gratitude. The feed showed Xylan citizens lining up their faces, a mixture of reverence and resignation. They brought forth gleaming artifacts, data crystals, even young children dressed in ceremonial white. The host's proctors accepted each offering with a gesture of sanctimonious benevolence. It was a perfectly choreographed extraction. Principia, the ship's fleet mind, spoke in the calm, synthesized voice that filled the command deck. Commander, my analysis of the host's energy grid confirms a discrepancy. The power they provide to Xylos is significantly less than the output of their stellar collectors. The accounting is imbalanced. Rostova nodded slightly. The first thread had been found. A debt built on a lie was not a debt at all. It was extortion. Log it, Principia, she said. We will build our case on the numbers. The ledger does not feel gratitude. It only counts. The Xylan artisan clutched the shimmerwood sculpture to her chest. It depicted the first tree, a foundational myth of her people. It had taken her 3 years to carve each sliver of wood a prayer. Now a gilded proctor, with a face of polished chrome, extended a 3-fingered hand. A worthy contribution to the mantle of shared progress. The proctor intoned its voice, a soft, synthesized chime. The artisan wanted to scream, to smash the sculpture, rather than surrender it. Instead, she bowed her head and placed her soul into the cold, waiting hand. Her daughter watched from the doorway, learning the precise shape of her people's cage. A priority channel request blinked on the main screen. It was the gilded host's local prefect. Rostova smoothed her uniform jacket. On screen, full diplomacy protocols. The face that appeared was long and elegant, cast from a material that resembled pearlescent ivory. It introduced itself as Proctor Scribe Varro. Human vessel Varro began its voice dripping with ancient condescension. You have arrived at a moment of sacred communion between mentor and student. We trust your observational mandate does not include interference. They speak of law, but practice dominion. Rostova met its gaze without blinking. Proctor Scribe Varro. Commander Eva Rostova of the United Nations ship Principia, she replied, her voice steady. Our mandate is to observe all practices under the Pan-Galactic Concordat, especially those concerning developing sovereignties. We are here to witness and to learn. Varro's smooth face remained impassive, but its eyes' multifaceted crystals seemed to narrow. Learning is the gift we bestow upon the Xylans, a gift that requires a humble return. Surely your young species understands the principle of gratitude. The word young was a carefully placed insult, a reminder of humanity's newcomer status in a galaxy of ancient powers. Humanity understands reciprocity, Rostova countered, choosing her words with care. We also understand the difference between a gift and a loan. The Concordat requires transparent accounting in all mentorship arrangements. This was a calibrated probe, a signal that she was looking at the fine print. Varro's placid demeanor did not change, but a new, colder light flickered in its crystal eyes. Our ledgers are as old as your sun, Commander. They are balanced. We have nothing to hide. The oldest lies are often hidden in the most ancient books. Then you will have no objection to a preliminary audit. Rostova stated the words landing like stones in a quiet pool. It was not an accusation, but a procedural request protected by galactic law, a simple verification of the energy and resource exchange between your infrastructure and the Xylan people, a formality to satisfy my report. Thorn shifted his weight beside her, a subtle sign of his approval. This was the first move on the legal chessboard. Varro was silent for a long moment, the only sound the faint hum of the Principia's life support. The gratitude tithe is not a commercial transaction, Commander. It is a moral covenant. The Concordat makes no distinction, Rostova pressed gently. All transfers of energy and material between a mentor and a protected species must be logged and justifiable as developmental aid. She was using their own language of uplift against them. She was not questioning their right to be here, only the math of their presence. Justice begins with counting the costs. The proctor scribe finally gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. We will grant your request. Our archives are open to you. Drown in them if you wish. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. It's a trap, Thorn said immediately. They'll bury us in useless data. A classic delay tactic. Rostova turned to the fleet mind. Principia, what is your projection? The AI's synthesized voice was immediate. The proctor's offer is a high-probability data flood strategy. Based on their technological profile, they can transmit an exabyte of raw data per second. My core systems can handle the intake, but analysis could take standard decades. The scale of the problem was immense. They were being offered a library the size of a solar system, filled with lies written in the ink of ages. They are confident we will find nothing, because they expect us to look for a single fraudulent entry. Rostova reasoned, pacing slowly before the main view screen. They think we will check the receipts. They don't expect us to audit the foundation of the entire economy. She stopped and faced her crew. We are not looking for a needle in a haystack. We are going to prove the entire haystack is poison. She turned her gaze to the holographic display of the Xylan system. The gilded host's orbital structures gleamed with a golden light, a beautiful and terrible net cast around a sun. Every gilded cage is still a cage. Principia, ignore the transactional data for now, Rostova commanded. Focus on the source. I want a full-spectrum analysis of their primary stellar collector. Cross-reference its energy absorption with the system's total solar output and the energy expenditure logs they provide. I want to know where every single joule is going. Lena Petrova's eyes widened slightly as she understood the strategy. They weren't auditing the tithe. They were auditing the sun itself. It was a bold, unprecedented legal maneuver. To unravel a grand lie, you pull on the thread of a simple truth. Days turned into a week. The Principia hung in silent orbit, a silver scalpel poised over a festering wound. The data flood from the gilded host was relentless, a torrent of legal code, historical precedents, and falsified energy logs. Principia's sub-minds worked tirelessly, sifting, sorting, and flagging inconsistencies. On the surface, the host's accounting seemed impeccable. For every unit of energy they provided to Xylos, their ledgers showed a corresponding draw from the stellar collector. But the numbers felt wrong, like a story told too perfectly. Perfection is often the best disguise for a lie. A young Xylan astronomer sat in his observatory, a place his great-grandfather had built. He aimed his telescope not at distant galaxies, but at the golden lattice the host had built around his sun. For generations they had been taught it was a shield, a gift that tamed their star's violent flares. But his readings showed anomalies. The star's chromosphere was cooler than it should be, its energy output subtly muted. The shield wasn't just blocking flares, it was drinking the sun's light. He logged his findings, a quiet act of scientific rebellion, in a world that had forgotten how to question its benefactors. "Commander, I have isolated the core deception," Principia announced, its voice cutting through the quiet hum of the bridge. A complex energy schematic filled the main screen. The host's stellar collector is not a shield, it is a siphon. A Dyson-class energy harvesting array disguised as a protective measure. The schematic shifted, showing a river of raw power being drawn from the star. A small fraction was diverted to Xylos. The vast majority was being beamed out of the system to a destination unknown. The price of their charity was a stolen star. Thorne swore under his breath, a sharp, angry sound. "They're bleeding the system dry. It's a protection racket. They create the dependency, then charge for the cure." Petrova looked horrified. "It's worse than that. They are artificially limiting Xylos's technological development. By controlling the power, they control the future." Rostova stared at the screen, her expression grim. The evidence was damning, a truth so profound it could shatter the gilded host's ancient reputation. But evidence was not enough. She needed a confession. A fact is a whisper. A confession is a thunderclap. "They disguised a vampire as a guardian," Rostova murmured, "and they justified it with a law book written in the blood of their victims." She now understood the full shape of the crime. It was elegant, patient, and utterly evil. The gratitude tithe wasn't just about resources. It was about breaking a species' spirit, teaching them to be grateful for their own diminishment. Now the real battle began. She had the facts, but the host had millennia of legal precedent. She would have to force them into a courtroom where their logic could be dismantled piece by piece. She opened a channel to Proctor Scribe Varro. "Proctor," she began, her voice cold as the space between worlds. "We have completed our preliminary audit of your energy grid. We have found a significant anomaly that requires immediate clarification under Concordat Emergency Protocol 7.3. A flicker of something surprise annoyance crossed Varro's ivory face. "Anomaly, Commander. Our systems are flawless. Our accounting is precise." It was the programmed response of a creature who had never been successfully questioned. "Pride is the armor of the tyrant. Your stellar array is drawing an amount of energy vastly disproportionate to the needs of this system," Rostova stated flatly. "You are not shielding this star. You are harvesting it." She let the accusation hang in the air. Varro's composure was perfect. "We are stabilizing the star, Commander. A complex process. The excess energy is carefully vented. It is a service we provide." The lie was smooth, practiced. It was the lie they had probably told themselves for centuries. A lie repeated long enough becomes a kind of truth. "Then you will have no issue explaining this venting process before a public quorum," Rostova countered, springing the trap. "Concordat law is clear. Any action affecting the primary star of a sentient world requires full public disclosure. I am formally invoking the right of inquiry. She was pushing them into a corner. They could refuse, which would be an admission of guilt. Or they could accept confident that their ancient legal cunning would prevail over this upstart human. The arrogant believe their own myths. Varro's crystal eyes seemed to burn with a cold fire. You are overstepping your mandate, human. This is a matter of our ancestral stewardship. It is a matter of galactic law, Rostova corrected him. A law you are subject to. We will convene the inquiry in 3 days. A broadcast will be sent to all concordant members in this sector. You will have your chance to present your case to the galaxy. She did not wait for a reply. She cut the channel, leaving the proctor to stare into the void. The gauntlet had been thrown. The corridor of law was opening, and the gilded host had no choice but to walk it. Now comes the reckoning. The next 3 days were a blur of intense preparation. Petrova and her team worked with Principia to build a legal case of irrefutable logic. They dissected the host's own legal doctrines, looking for the contradictions and hypocrisies they knew were hidden within. Rostova spent her time in the ship's small arboretum, centering herself. The air smelled of damp earth and living green things, a reminder of the world she was fighting for. She was not just a commander anymore. She was an advocate, a prosecutor, and the chosen representative of a species that still believed justice was a thing to be built, not inherited. The day of the inquiry arrived. A neutral space was designated, a point in space equidistant from the Principia and the gilded host's command vessel. Holo emitters flickered to life, creating a virtual courtroom. Dozens of windows opened, showing the faces of ambassadors and observers from across the sector. The insectoid Cathar, the crystalline silicates, the gas giant dwelling Ur. A quorum had been achieved. The galaxy was watching. The law is a stage, and we are all actors. Proctor Scribe Varro appeared, its form shimmering with golden light. It projected an aura of immense age and unshakable authority. Rostova stood opposite, clad in her simple UN uniform. She looked small and transient before the ancient being, a human against a god. But she carried a weapon Varro could not comprehend, a simple, unyielding truth. The inquiry began. The neutral arbiter, a silicate entity of pure logic, laid out the rules. Rostova would present her case. Varro would have the right to respond. There would be no violence, no threats, only words and evidence. In the court of stars, truth is the only weapon. On Xylos, a teacher gathered her students in a hidden cellar. On a makeshift screen, they watched the broadcast from space. They did not understand the complex legal language, but they understood the image of the small human standing against the golden giant. For the first time in centuries, a flicker of hope, dangerous and unfamiliar, ignited in the darkness. It was the hope that the sky above them was not a ceiling, but a horizon. Rostova began, not with the energy readings, but with a question. Proctor Scribe Varro, please state for the quorum the foundational principle of the gilded host's mentorship doctrine. Varro's voice was smooth as polished stone. Our principle is simple and benevolent. We guide younger races to enlightenment. We protect them from the dangers of the cosmos, both external and internal. We ask for nothing but their gratitude in return. It was a beautiful sentiment, a lie wrapped in the language of altruism. The prettiest words can hide the sharpest teeth. A noble principle, Rostova conceded. Let us examine the nature of this protection. You have constructed a stellar array around the Xylan sun. You claim it is a shield. Our audit shows it is a siphon drawing far more power than is needed for stellar stabilization. She presented Principia's first wave of data, clean, cold, and undeniable. Energy charts bloomed in the virtual space, their stark lines painting a picture of cosmic theft. The assembled quorum watched in silence, their alien faces unreadable but attentive. Numbers have no agenda. Varro did not flinch. The commander uses inflammatory language. Siphon. We prefer stewardship. The star is a volatile engine. We manage its output, ensuring a stable environment for our Xylan charges. The surplus energy is a byproduct of this vital service. The proctor was masterful, reframing theft as a public service. It was a twisting of logic that had clearly worked for millennia. Rostova had expected it. She was ready for the next step of her argument. To defeat a liar, you must first let them speak their lie aloud, a byproduct that you beam to your other territories. Rostova countered, presenting a second dataset. Principia had tracked the focused energy transmissions. You are exporting this system's primary resource. Is this part of your stewardship? Varro's condescension was palpable. We are an ancient and widespread civilization, Commander. We have responsibilities. The energy is used to power our fleets, which protect countless worlds, including this one. The Xylans contribute to their own security. It is a circle of benevolence. It was a brilliant defense. The host was not stealing. They were funding galactic peace with the spare change from a star. Rostova paused, letting the proctor's words settle in the minds of the quorum. She had led him to the heart of his own twisted philosophy. Now she would dismantle it. So the Xylans, a pre-warp civilization, are unknowingly funding the energy budget of a galactic superpower. And for this, they are charged a gratitude tithe. She turned to face the holographic gallery of alien faces. The core of this inquiry is not about energy, but about consent. Did the Xylan people consent to having their star harvested? Were they given a choice? A choice not offered is a right denied. Choice is a complex concept for a developing species, Varro replied, its voice taking on the tone of a patient teacher, explaining a simple concept to a difficult child. To give them a choice they cannot comprehend is not freedom, it is cruelty. We make the choice for them as a parent does for a child. It is the burden of the wise. This was the moment Rostova had been waiting for. The admission. The philosophical bedrock of their entire empire. The doctrine of the caller spoken aloud for all to hear. Every tyrant believes their chains are a kindness. Before Rostova could respond, Principia sent a private message to her neural lace. Commander, I have finished the deep archival analysis. I have found the origin of their benevolent doctrine. It is not what they claim. Rostova's heart beat a little faster. This was the key. Not just to winning the inquiry, but to exposing the lie at the center of the gilded host's identity. She had the proctor trapped in his own logic. Now she had the truth of his history. The past is a weapon that never rusts. A parent's duty is to prepare a child for independence, not to keep them in a state of perpetual infancy. Rostova stated, her voice ringing with conviction. You are not a parent. You are a warden. You have placed this entire species in a cradle, and you are slowly rocking it into a grave. She looked directly at Varro, her human eyes meeting its ancient crystalline gaze. You speak of wisdom, but your entire philosophy is built on a trauma you never recovered from. The proctor's golden aura flickered for the briefest of moments. A crack had appeared in the perfect polished facade. The oldest wounds are the ones that never healed. The members of the quorum stirred. This was no longer a dispute over resources. It had become a trial of a civilization's soul. Rostova had the floor, and she had the truth. She was ready to show the galaxy the rot that lay beneath the gilded surface. She took a breath. Let us speak of your homeworld, Proctor. Let us speak of the day your star died, and you learned to drink the light of others to survive. The public inquiry had just become a public vivisection. Your accusation is baseless and insulting. Varro shot back its voice, losing its placid tone for the first time. The golden light around it intensified, a clear display of agitation. The history of the Gilded Host is one of triumph, of ascending beyond the limitations of a single star. We did not survive. We evolved. But the denial was too quick, too sharp. Rostova had struck a nerve, a deep, ancient, and festering wound. The loudest denials often conceal the deepest truths. You have my sincerest sympathies for the fate of your original system, Rostova said, her tone softening into one of clinical pity, a far more effective weapon than anger. But you did not evolve. You fractured. And you have spent the last 100,000 years forcing other species to pay for your ancient misfortune. She signaled to Principia. A new set of data appeared in the courtroom. It was not charts or energy readings. It was history. Deep space archaeolinguistic data recovered from forgotten archives. The Gilded Host's own origin story written by their first generation of survivors. No history is ever truly erased. The texts were stark and desperate. They spoke of a dying sun, a panicked flight into the void, and the terrible discovery that their physiology required a specific type of stellar radiation to survive. They described the first time they built a stellar collector not as a grand act of stewardship, but as a desperate parasitic necessity. They had collared a star to save themselves. It was a tragic, understandable act of survival. But it was not the glorious ascension Varro had described. Memory can be a sanctuary or a prison. Your foundational text. Rostova said, her voice gentle but relentless. It does not speak of a circle of benevolence. It speaks of a chain of necessity. It does not speak of gratitude. It speaks of a debt of light. She let the words hang in the silent courtroom. At some point in your long history, you rewrote your own scripture. You turned a tragic necessity into a moral crusade. You convinced yourselves your crutch was a crown. The UNS Principia teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. A low murmur passed through the assembled quorum. The evidence was irrefutable, pulled from the host's own hidden history. Varro stood frozen, its perfect pearlescent face a mask of disbelief. It was watching its civilization's entire moral framework being dismantled not by a fleet of warships, but by a human historian with a library card. The weight of a single fact can shatter an empire of lies. Rostova had not just proven their actions were illegal. She had proven their entire identity was a fraud. You are not mentors, Rostova declared, her voice rising with righteous power. You are addicts feeding on the light of younger, brighter stars. The Xylans are not your children. They are your victims. You have been treating your wound by infecting others with it. She had stripped away the golden veneer, the sanctimonious pronouncements, the millennia of legal obfuscation. All that was left was the ugly, parasitic truth. The proctor was speechless. It had no defense. Its own history had been turned into a mirror, and the reflection was monstrous. Truth is the most unforgiving of mirrors. On the bridge of the Principia Aris, Thorn watched the proceedings, his clenched fists slowly uncurling. He had wanted a battle of weapons and strategy. He was witnessing a battle of ideas, and it was more devastating than any torpedo volley. Petrova was weeping silently, not from sorrow, but from a profound sense of catharsis. They were watching a victory, not for humanity, but for the very concept of justice itself. A principle defended is a victory for all. Rostova let the silence stretch, allowing the full weight of the revelation to settle upon the quorum. She had presented her case. She had proven motive means and a history of deception. Now she would deliver the final killing blow to their legal authority. The doctrine of reciprocal nourishment is a lie, she said, her voice now hard as diamond. It is predicated on a history that you yourselves have buried. Therefore, every action, every contract, every tithe collected under this doctrine is null and void. A house built on a rotten foundation cannot stand. She turned her attention back to the proctor, who seemed to be shrinking, the golden light around it dimming. You are not stewards. You are debtors. You owe this system for generations of stolen light, stolen progress, and stolen hope. She was no longer just a commander. She was a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for a species that didn't even know it needed one. The tide had turned. The ancient predator was now the defendant, exposed and vulnerable in the court of galactic opinion. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The silicate arbiter, which had been silent throughout, finally spoke its voice, a series of resonant crystalline tones, Proctor Scribe Varro of the Gilded Host. The quorum has heard the evidence presented by Commander Rostova of the United Nations. We await your rebuttal. It was a formality. There was no rebuttal. The truth was out naked and shimmering in the virtual space between them. The great ancient gilded host had been undone by a librarian. There is no armor against the truth. Varro stood motionless for what felt like an eternity. The silence was absolute. When it finally spoke, its voice was not the smooth, condescending tone of a superior being. It was the dry, rasping whisper of something hollowed out, defeated. There is no rebuttal. The admission sent a shockwave through the quorum. It was a surrender, a complete and unconditional capitulation. The Gilded Host, a power that had stood for eons, had been broken by two words. The most powerful surrender is the one spoken in silence. A Xylan child huddled with his family around a secret broadcast watched the golden figure on the screen seem to fade. He did not understand the words, but he understood the shift in power. He looked at his mother, whose face was wet with tears he had never seen before. He tugged on her sleeve. "Is the forever tax over?" he whispered. She pulled him into a hug, unable to speak, and simply nodded. Hope had finally returned to their world. Rostova gave a curt nod to the arbiter. She had won the inquiry. But this was only the first step. The verdict was in, but the sentence had yet to be carried out. Justice required more than a confession. It required restitution. The ledger had to be balanced, not with words, but with action. The finding is clear, Rostova said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. Now we must address the matter of reparations. We must count the cost. She looked at the diminished form of Proctor Varro, her expression not triumphant, but grimly determined. The real work was about to begin. Justice is not a destination. It is a process. She signaled Principia. A new window opened in the virtual court, displaying a complex but clear schematic. It was a plan. A way to undo the damage that had been done. The Gilded Host will begin by dismantling the stellar siphon, she announced. The schematic showed the vast golden array being carefully disassembled. The energy it has collected and stored will be returned to the Xylan system. Every jewel will be accounted for. This was the first part of the mirror justice she intended to enact. The stolen light would be given back. The first step to healing is to return what was taken. Furthermore, Rostova continued, her voice gaining strength. The Gilded Host will surrender all technological and cultural artifacts taken as part of the gratitude tithe. They will be returned to the Xylan people along with a complete uncensored copy of your own true history. They deserve to know who their mentors truly were. She was not just demanding repayment. She was demanding truth and reconciliation. The Xylons would not only get their property back, they would get their history back and their freedom from the lies that had bound them. Freedom begins with the truth. The proctor did not protest. It simply stood there, a hollowed-out shell of its former arrogance. The gilded host's authority had been shattered. Its mystique was gone. All that remained was a long, shameful history and a debt that would take centuries to repay. Rostova then unveiled the final and most crucial part of her plan, the part that would ensure this could never happen again. A public ledger will be established, monitored by the Concordat, she declared. It will track the host's compliance with these terms. Every transfer of energy, every returned artifact will be logged for all to see. Trust must be earned, and transparency is the currency. This was the masterstroke. She was not just punishing the host, she was placing them in a cage of their own making, a cage of perfect accounting and public scrutiny. They would still exist, but they would be forever watched, their actions forever measured against the crime they had committed. The age of their unquestioned authority was over. The precedent was being set. No species, no matter how old or powerful, was above the law. A public ledger is the brightest light. The arbiter ratified the terms. The inquiry was over. The windows showing the faces of the Galactic quorum began to close one by one, their purpose served. Soon only Rostova and the broken proctor remained in the virtual space. "You have destroyed us," human Vara whispered, its voice filled with a venomous despair. "You have undone 100,000 years of stability." Rostova shook her head. "You did this to yourselves. You built an empire on a lie, and the truth simply arrived to collect the debt. The bill always comes due." She cut the final connection, and the command deck of the Principia returned to its normal, quiet state. The main screen now showed the gilded host's fleet, no longer looking majestic, but merely old and tired. Thorn let out a long, slow breath. "It's over." Petrova looked at her commander, her eyes filled with awe. "You didn't just defeat them, Eva. You taught them. You forced them to see themselves for what they are." Rostova felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, deep and profound. It was the cost of the victory, the weight of a species' future on her shoulders. She had won, but the fight had taken something from her. Even a righteous victory carries a cost. Principia Rostova said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Begin monitoring their compliance. Log everything. We're not leaving until the first shipment of returned energy is confirmed." Her duty was not over. The judgment had been passed, but justice had to be seen to be done. She watched the golden ships begin the slow, laborious process of shutting down their stellar siphon. The long night for Xylos was ending. A new dawn, one they would control themselves, was about to begin. The first payment on an ancient debt was being prepared. The first payment was not a gesture of goodwill. It was a weapon. Gigantic golden panels of the stellar array began to retract, not with the careful precision of disassembly, but with the sullen, angry motion of a forced retreat. From the bridge of the Principia, Rostova and her crew watched the great machine begin to unclench its fist from around the Xylan sun. The star, for the first time in centuries, was being allowed to breathe free. Even a star can know the relief of a lifted burden. "The energy siphon is offline." Principia reported, its synthesized voice calm as ever. "They are redirecting the stored power from their accumulators. The first wave of reparations is imminent." Aris Thorn allowed himself a small, tight smile. So they are complying. They know the galaxy is watching. But Rostova felt a knot of unease in her stomach. The host had not survived for 100,000 years by being simple or predictable. Their surrender had been too absolute, their compliance too swift. An old predator does not change its nature, only its methods. On Xylos, the first signs were subtle. The sky brightened. The golden latticework that had been a constant presence in their lives began to thin. In a small village, a weaver who had just finished her morning prayers looked up and saw a patch of unfiltered, brilliant blue sky for the first time in her life. She dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face, and gave thanks not to the gilded host, but to the silent silver ship that hung like a new star in the heavens. Celebrations began to erupt across the planet, quiet and hesitant at first, then growing into a global chorus of liberation. "Commander, the first energy transfer is beginning," Petrova announced from her station. "Targeting the planetary power grid as specified in the ruling." On the main screen, a shimmering beam of pure energy thick as a river lanced down from one of the host's orbital platforms. It connected with a Xylan receiving station on the planet's equator. The station, designed to handle the gentle trickle of power the host had always provided, was immediately overwhelmed. Lights flickered across the continent. Fuses blew. The grid buckled under the sudden brutal influx of power. A gift given with malice is a poison. "Report!" Rostova snapped the knot in her stomach, tightening into a cold certainty. "They're overloading the system," Thorne growled, his brief moment of satisfaction evaporating into fury. "It's malicious compliance. They're following the letter of the law, but they're going to burn the whole planet's infrastructure to the ground while doing it." Principia's voice cut through the rising tension. The energy being transferred is raw and unsmoothed. High-entropy stellar plasma. It is technically energy, but it is as useful as trying to drink from a volcano. The law has no words for cruelty of this kind. Rostova's jaw was set like granite. She had anticipated a deception, but this was more insidious than she had imagined. The host was fulfilling its obligation in the most destructive way possible, turning the act of repayment into an attack. They were salting the earth with the very coins they were forced to repay. "They are teaching a final spiteful lesson," Petrova murmured, her face pale. "They are teaching the Xylans that freedom is dangerous, that the host's guidance was a form of safety. The most effective chains are the ones we learn to love. Can we stop it?" Rostova asked, her mind already racing ahead, formulating a counter-strategy. "We cannot legally interfere with the transfer," Principia stated. "The public ledger shows they are transferring the correct amount of energy. The Concordat's automated systems will register it as compliance. They were trapped." The host was using the very tool of transparency Rostova had created against her. The ledger showed the what, but not the how. It was a perfect, legal, and devastating act of sabotage. The letter of the law can be a tyrant's best shield. A vignette of chaos unfolded on a civilian feed from Xylos. A medical center's lights exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging surgeons into darkness mid-procedure. Automated farming equipment went haywire, carving destructive patterns into the fields. The joyful celebrations of an hour ago had turned into confusion and fear. The gift of light had become a curse of fire. The people looked to the sky no longer with hope, but with the old, familiar dread. Their saviors had, it seemed, delivered them from a cage into a fire. Rostova paced the bridge, her footsteps echoing in the tense silence. To protest would be to get mired in a new legal battle, one that could take years while Xylos burned. To attack would be to make humanity the aggressor, undoing everything she had accomplished. She needed a new move, one that was immediate, effective, and legally unimpeachable. "They want to prove that only they can handle the power of a star," she said, thinking aloud. "They want to prove that their stewardship, their collar, was necessary. The abuser always wants to be needed. Then we will prove them wrong," she declared, a new and dangerous idea taking shape in her mind. She stopped and faced her crew. "We will show them what true stewardship looks like." She turned to the fleet mind. "Principia, calculate the maximum safe energy intake of our primary defensive shields. I want to know if we can catch a river of plasma." The AI's synthesized voice returned almost instantly. The shields can absorb the energy, Commander, but they are not designed to store it. The energy would have to be immediately rerouted and dissipated. A shield can become a lens if you change your perspective. We won't dissipate it, Rostova said, a glint of steel in her eyes. We will refine it. The plan that bloomed in her mind was audacious, a piece of legal and engineering jujitsu on a solar system scale. Thorn, bring us into a new orbit. Place the Principia directly between the host's transmission beam and the Xylan receiving station. Thorn's eyes widened. Commander, that's positioning ourselves as a target. It was a risky maneuver, a violation of standard fleet doctrine. We are not a target, Rostova corrected him. We are becoming a conduit, a filter, a mirror. To tame a fire, you must first be willing to stand in its heat. The UNS Principia moved with a silent, determined grace. It positioned itself in the path of the destructive energy beam. The ship's powerful shields flared to life, a bubble of shimmering blue force. The raw, chaotic plasma from the host's platform slammed into the shield, not with a violent explosion, but with a colossal, silent impact. The light on the bridge flickered as vast amounts of power were absorbed and contained. The ship shuddered, a deep, resonant groan that spoke of immense forces being brought to heel. Power controlled is the beginning of order. Shields at 70% and holding, Thorn reported, his voice tight with adrenaline. Energy intake is stable, but the heat sinks are screaming. Rostova's gaze was fixed on the main screen. Principia, open a channel to the Concordat public ledger. I want a new real-time entry. Label it Energy Processing and Refining. Link it directly to our shield and power core telemetry. She was about to turn the ledger from a simple receipt book into a live performance of competence. Show, don't tell. It is the first rule of truth. A new column of data appeared on the public ledger for the entire sector to see. The first column showed the raw high-entropy energy being beamed from the gilded host. The second column, updated in real time by Principia, showed the stable low-entropy usable energy being processed through the human ship. The contrast was stark, undeniable. The galaxy was not just seeing the host repay a debt. They were seeing them do it badly, and they were seeing humanity clean up the mess. It was a public shaming written in the language of physics. Competence is the ultimate rebuke to malice. Now Rostova commanded, begin the broadcast. All frequencies, to Xylos. Her voice was patched through to the planet below. People of Xylos, this is Commander Rostova of the UNS Principia. The energy being returned to you is a raw, untamed force. Do not fear. We will be your shield. We will filter the light for you. We will help you rebuild. It was a promise broadcast to a world that had forgotten what promises meant. It was a statement that stewardship was not about control, but about service. A true guardian does not command, they serve. From the Principia's ventral emitters, a new beam of energy began to flow. It was gentle, coherent, and precisely calibrated to the Xylan grid's capacity. It was the same energy the host had weaponized, but now it was tamed, refined, a gift given freely and safely. On Xylos, the lights came back on, not with a violent surge, but with a steady, reassuring glow. Power was restored. The chaos subsided. The mirror maneuver was working. The human ship was catching the fire and turning it into warmth. Justice is not just about returning what was stolen, but healing the damage done. Proctor Scribe Varro watched the human ship's intervention from the bridge of its ancient command vessel. The rage it felt was a cold, black thing. The humans had not just defied them, they had humiliated them. They had taken the host's final act of spite and turned it into a demonstration of their own moral and technical superiority. The public ledger, once a tool for their malicious compliance, was now a monument to their failure, broadcasting their incompetence to the galaxy. Humiliation is a wound that never closes. They are using our own energy to make us look like fools, Varro hissed to its subordinates. They are turning our power against us. The gambit had failed. The humans had refused to be victims. They had refused to be aggressors. They had chosen a third path, one of service and public accountability. The proctor knew then that this was no longer a legal dispute. It was a war for legitimacy, and it was a war they were losing. Desperation began to cloud its ancient calculating mind. When logic fails, violence feels like a solution. The human ship's shields are under immense strain, one of Varro's technicians reported. They are diverting almost all of their ship's power to maintain the energy bridge. Their own defensive systems will be compromised. An idea ugly and final took root in Varro's mind. An accident. A tragic, unavoidable system malfunction. A power surge in their own transmitter too great for even the arrogant humans to contain. It would be deniable. It would be effective. It would be the end of Eva Rostova and her ship of meddling idealists. Desperation is the mother of atrocity. On the Principia, Rostova felt a subtle shift in the energy beam. A new, more violent harmonic. Principia, what was that? The fleet mind's voice was for the first time tinged with something that resembled urgency. Commander, I am detecting a cascading power fluctuation in the host's transmitter. It is consistent with a precursor to a critical overload. They are going to detonate the energy stream. They were going to turn the river into a tidal wave, one so large it would overwhelm the Principia's shields and destroy them both in a flash of incandescent plasma. The last act of the tyrant is to pull the temple down on everyone's head. Thorn, get us out of here, Petrova yelled, her composure finally breaking. We can't, Thorn replied, his hands flying over his console. If we move, that blast hits the planet. The atmospheric ignition would sterilize the whole hemisphere. They were in a trap. They could save themselves and sacrifice Xylos, or they could hold their ground and be annihilated. It was a checkmate delivered with a sun's worth of power. There are choices that are not choices at all. Rostova closed her eyes for a single second, the weight of 1 billion lives settling onto her soul. When she opened them, her voice was ice. Principia, log the power surge, trace its origin signature, log everything, broadcast it all to the public ledger, in real time. She turned to Thorn. All remaining power to the forward shields, all of it. She looked at the image of the blue world they were protecting. She had come here to win by law, not by sacrifice. But if the cost of victory was her ship and her life, it was a cost she was willing to pay. The ledger would be their witness. The truth would be their legacy. A principle is only a principle if you are willing to die for it. The energy beam from the host vessel turned from gold to a blinding, furious white. The overload was coming. On the public ledger, a new frantic stream of data appeared showing the energy levels climbing to impossible heights. It showed the signature of deliberate, malicious tampering. The Gilded Host's final act was not just an attack. It was a signed confession broadcast live to the galaxy. The mirror justice was complete. They were showing the universe exactly who they were. In the end, all beings reveal their true nature. But Rostova had one final move. A move born not of technology, but of understanding her enemy's ancient, wounded soul. Principia, she said, her voice a calm whisper in the roaring chaos of the bridge. Open a direct channel to Proctor Scribe Varro. Audio only. The connection chimed open. The sound of the host's bridge was audible, filled with frantic, panicked commands. They were losing control of the monster they had unleashed. Proctor Varro Rostova said, her voice cutting through the noise like a shard of glass. Your star died, and you were too weak to save it. Now you are trying to kill this one because you cannot bear to see it given freely to others. She paused. You are not a god. You are an echo, a ghost haunting a galaxy that has outgrown you. She did not shout. She did not accuse. She simply spoke the truth of his being the diagnosis of his civilization's sickness. The most painful truths are the ones we already know. Her words struck the proctor with the force of a physical blow. In that final critical moment, Varro saw the abyss of his own making. He saw the pathetic, cyclical nature of his people's rage. They were not gods. They were not even survivors. They were just the frightened, angry children of a dead star, still lashing out at the universe for its ancient crime. The reflection in Rostova's mirror was too terrible to bear. With a choked cry, Varro slammed a hand down on an emergency control. The energy beam, seconds from its apocalyptic detonation, collapsed into nothing. Silence. A profound, echoing silence fell upon the bridge of the Principia. The whine of overloaded systems began to fade. The red warning lights blinked out one by one. Thorn slumped against his console, breathing heavily. Petrova was holding a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. They were alive. Xylos was safe. Rostova stood perfectly still, her knuckles white where she gripped the command rail. The cost had been high. The Principia's power core was shattered, its shield emitters fused. They were crippled adrift. But they had won. The victory is not in surviving the storm, but in calming it. The public ledger told the rest of the story. It had recorded everything: the sabotage attempt, the signature of the host's controls, and then the abrupt manual shutdown. There was no ambiguity, no plausible deniability. The gilded host had been caught in front of the entire galaxy, attempting to murder a world and a concordate vessel to cover their crimes. The consequences were immediate and absolute. A concordate judgment, swift and final, was issued. The gilded host's special mentorship status was revoked galaxy-wide. Their fleets were confined to their own systems, their right to interact with developing worlds rescinded for 1,000 years. The doctrine of reciprocal nourishment was declared a criminal philosophy. The name of the gilded host, once a byword for ancient wisdom, became a synonym for cosmic shame. The precedent was locked. The law had been tested by fire, and it had held. The law is not a shield, it is a kiln that burns away the lies. Days later, as the crippled Principia prepared for a slow journey to the nearest starbase, a transmission came from Xylos. It was the young astronomer Rostova's crew had noticed. He stood before a council of his own people, his face filled with a nervous, brilliant hope. "Commander Rostova," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have given us back our sky. We do not know how to thank you. We have no tithe to offer." Rostova smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "Keep your sky," she replied. "Learn from it. Build with it. That is the only gratitude we will ever ask for." The connection closed, leaving Rostova alone with her thoughts. She had upheld the law. She had freed a world. She had held up a mirror to a fallen empire. She had paid a price in damage to her ship and a new weight in her soul, but the ledger was finally truly balanced. She walked to the main view screen, which now showed the uncaged Xylan sun burning brightly in the void. Beside it, the public ledger entry for the entire affair blinked with its final immutable status. Confirmed. Justice is not a weapon to be wielded, but a light to be shared. It cannot be given. It can only be recognized. It is the simple, terrible, and beautiful act of seeing things as they are, and counting the costs, and then against all the darkness, choosing to pay. The debt was paid.